Hello again. I have been reading a book by a man who seems to be a professor of African history at the University of Chichester, and I feel that I can say bluntly that it contains more inaccurate information, errors, and downright untruthful statements about British history than I have ever before seen gathered together in a single volume. Fortunately, I'm not asking viewers to take my word for this. By following the link to the Amazon listing for the book, which may be found in the description to this video, people can check for themselves what I'm saying. Just go to the site and then click on the image of the book's cover and you will be able to read part of the first chapter, which will be quite enough to show what I mean. I thought that people might be interested to see how some of the falsehoods and misleading statements which one sees about supposed black history are actually devised and disseminated. This is a source book for some of the nonsense which reviewers have very likely come across. Let's start on page 2 with the assertion that DNA evidence suggests that African migrants had reached Britain 1,000 years before the Romans. No reference is given for this statement, which is odd for an academic work by a history professor. He at once drops the supposed DNA evidence and starts talking about the isotopes in the teeth of skeletons, which can sometimes tell us where a person grew up. Professor Hardy skims over this and then mentions the remains of Cheddar Man, and claims that this man, from 10,000 years ago and found in Britain, had skin which was dark to black, and he makes a lot of this, hinting that this was the skin colour of people in Europe and Britain, which means that black people were here before the Anglo-Saxons. This is very cunning, because there were indeed headlines about this when a television programme was made a few years ago. Hardy mentions the Natural History Museum to make it all sound scientific. It is, of course, quite true that New Scientist reported in 2018 that, and I quote, "the first modern Briton who lived around 300 generations ago had dark to black skin." New Scientist. What Professor Hardy fails to tell his readers, and whether this is ignorance or deliberate deception, I have no idea, that 2 weeks later, New Scientist retracted this claim, saying bluntly that the whole episode smacks of a publicity stunt to hype up the show. There is some truth in that, but dismissing it outright does a disservice to the scientists. According to the state of knowledge at the time, the genetic analysis did suggest that Cheddar Man's skin was dark, but science progresses, and since the analysis was done last year, many more genes affecting skin colour have been discovered. Understandably, this new science didn't make it into the documentary. No, it didn't, because it really would have spoiled the effect of the black man that they mocked up as supposed to be what Cheddar Man looked like. In other words, nobody can say with any confidence what colour Cheddar Man's skin was. I give a link to the New Scientist article debunking the original claim in the description to this video. What do viewers think? Sheer ignorance or intentional deceit? We then come to the Roman Emperor Septimius Severus, whom Hardy says is of Berber origin. His reason for claiming this is to make sure that we think that he's genuinely African and not the child of colonists, which he was. Severus' mother was a Roman, not Berber, and his father was Carthaginian, that is to say the descendant of Phoenician settlers from what is now Lebanon. It has certainly been speculated that part of his father's ancestor might have been Berber, but there's no evidence to suggest that it was. This is mere speculation on the professor's part, presented as fact. There is some vague stuff about pottery which looks African and was found in this country, and then we come to the statement that archaeologists examined the skeleton of a young Roman woman from York and established that she was African. This is quite false. Isotope analysis of her teeth showed that she grew up either in Britain or Europe, and the only evidence that she was African comes from the shape of her skull. The computer program used to discern this, 4-disk, is very unreliable. And there's a bit about it in the Wikipedia article on the ivory bangle lady, to which I give a link. I will come back shortly to the use of Nazi race science in this way to determine ethnicity by measuring the skull. Page 5 mentions the so-called beachy head lady, and this just shows how inaccurate measuring the skull is as a way of finding out where somebody comes from. This is exactly what was done to the skull of Beachy Head woman, who was found near Beachy Head, a skeleton, and she's probably from the 3rd century AD. Professor Hardy tells us that analysis of her remains clearly demonstrates that she is from sub-Saharan Africa. This really is inexcusable. In fact, some years ago, DNA from this skeleton was tested at the Crick Institute and showed that she was from Europe, most likely Cyprus. Nothing at all to do with Africa. I give a link to a local paper from Sussex which mentions this 3 years ago. So since Professor Hardy's book was published in September 2022 and all the facts were known years before that, there really is no excuse for not being aware of the DNA testing. I really do not have the heart to carry on and discuss what he says about the medieval period, and I think that viewers might well have heard enough. This is the kind of book which people rely upon when they are claiming that black people have always lived in this country. There are only 2 possibilities that I can see. Either Professor Hardy is monumentally sloppy and simply could not be bothered to research topics such as the Beachy Head lady, in which case he had no business writing about her in the first place, or he knows all this as well as I do, but hopes that his readers will be too lazy to look into it. This, then, is where the fantasies about black Romans and black Vikings have their roots, in books written by academics who really ought to know better. A review of the book in The Guardian, where else, says that this is Professor Hardy's crowning achievement. If so, then I would hate to see his lesser works. I've given links to all this, so viewers are not obliged to take my word for any of what I say, but can check it all for themselves.